It was a miserable day to be sold. The auction house hung like a tumor off the side of Yantro's Zeta's sixth orbital ring, its shadow slung wide across the lava-scabbed surface of the planet below. Inside, filtered air stank of ozone, spiced meat from a dozen worlds, and that curious petroleum tang of bureaucratic corruption. Hundreds of eyes, many-faceted, a few leaking, all greedy, were fixed on the dais. Lights flashed. A gong reverberated through the bones of everyone present. The crowd rippled with noise, laughter, shrieks, and wet clapping noises from species that lacked traditional hands. Between the staggered bleachers, drinks bubbled in transparent sacks. Vendors floated between rows, selling hallucinogenic pollen and fried asteroid fungus. One writhing diplomat from the HFY hive sprayed a celebratory mist from its thorax every time a new slave was rolled out. Somewhere a religious sect howled an off-tempo chant meant to cleanse the commerce of souls. No one listened. Lot 38 stepped forward. She didn't look like much. Human, female, approximately 20 standard years of age. Brown hair cropped short, jaw bruised, and skin like Earth's early dawn. Pale, but not sickly. She wore a simple tunic issued to auction species, synthetic fiber that clung in a way that was clearly engineered for the visual appetites of several affluent classes. Shackles, of course, though the cuffs were polished chrome. The crowd loved a little shine. "She's the final item in today's premium round," boomed the announcer, a three-headed creature perched inside a translucent tank of amber gas. Its voices echoed through the bioamplifiers in triple harmony, oily and theatrical. Direct from the failed rebel colony on Theta Cradle, an untouched specimen. Note the eyes, yes? Clear, no neural wash. No augmentation. Fully natural. The murmurs grew louder. Ellie stood still. She knew the trick. Stand too proud, and they thought you were trying to provoke them. Look scared, and you went to the collectors, the ones who liked broken things. She kept her spine straight, but her gaze lazy. One eyebrow slightly arched, like someone bored at a funeral. Internally, she was counting. Doorways, guards, cameras, a strange spinning insect the size of her hand. Drone, most likely shaped like a flower, but blinking with the rhythm of data pulses. "She was found alive under 3 tons of rubble," said the announcer, "and refused rescue until she was sure the other survivors had died first." A martyr? A mystery? Or simply mad? The crowd loved that. They roared approval. One particularly wet member of the aristocracy flung a crystal goblet at the stage, shouting, "I'll bid 2 intersystem cruisers and a functioning moon." A banker from the Throsk sector raised an electro-whip and offered a planet's mineral rights. Someone in the back, possibly drunk or legally insane, just screamed, "Mine, mine, mine," and began chewing their own hat. Ellie tilted her head. "You'd think they'd check for sarcasm," she muttered under her breath. The guard next to her jabbed a prod into her ribs. She didn't flinch. He smelled like pickled meat and antifungal shampoo. Inside her mind, a different rhythm ticked. The numbers lined up like dancers. Gravity calibration, floor composition, average security response time in multi-species auctions, probability of electromagnetic interference from the star's core pulses. She was bought at the 40-minute mark, not by the highest bidder, but by the quietest. There was a murmur, a shift. The announcer, uncharacteristically flustered, consulted with a blinking cube. One head rotated 360 degrees. Another shrank slightly into the gas chamber like a deflating fruit. "It appears," the voices said slowly, "that we have received a direct override from the Galactic Combat League. The purchase is now formal. Lot number 38 has been requisitioned as a cultural participant in the arena of species supremacy." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Ellie blinked. The arena. Someone in the audience dropped a drink. A small, 4-legged rodent warrior hissed and ran out of the room. The CRYTH missed it again, this time in terror. She had expected a collector. A trophy room, maybe. A few years of cage life, followed by dissection or ceremonial roasting. But this was much better. The guard removed her shackles, stepping back as though she might explode. He had reason. Her records indicated 2 confirmed kills during capture, both with improvised tools. She rubbed her wrists, then reached down and carefully adjusted her boot. The announcer tried to regain composure. May the gods of combat bless this unlikely tribute. She will face the reigning champion, HFY of Sargalax, in 7 days' time. A screen unfurled above the crowd. HFY appeared in high definition, 12 feet tall, glossy carapace, ceremonial armor plated with the teeth of fallen foes. He flexed one limb the size of a steel beam. His species didn't talk. They just crushed things. Occasionally, they hummed. Ellie studied him. She noted the uneven wear on his left forelimb, the slight misalignment in his stride. Old injury? Weakness? Opportunity. The announcer wrapped things up. The auction closed. The crowds were ushered out by floating taser bots. Ellie was led into a side corridor and locked into a holding cell filled with antiseptic light and the faintest scent of dying flowers. She sat on the floor and exhaled once. Behind her face of calm calculation, memories stirred. The crater where the outpost had been. The charred remains of her family's communications gear. The image of the fleet passing overhead, silent, watching, recording. The laughter. They had called it a disciplinary raid. She called it a massacre. And now, through some bureaucratic miracle or cruel cosmic joke, they had placed her in the center of the largest broadcast spectacle in the galaxy. She would make them regret that. There was a panel in the wall. She tapped it. It hummed to life and displayed her upcoming schedule. Combat orientation, ritual weapon selection, genetic scanning. She tapped until she found the betting odds. She was listed at 873 to 1 against. Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. More like an adjustment. There was a note from a Combat League official. It read, "Please respond with dietary preferences. Your final meal will be adjusted accordingly." She typed 2 words, alien blood. The screen flickered. Somewhere, someone would read that and assume she was joking. She wasn't. As the lights dimmed for planetary night, Ellie lay back on the sterile floor and closed her eyes. The hum of power conduits echoed in the bones of the station. She slowed her breathing, running over the last 7 years of underground training. Neural pattern acceleration, oxygen deprivation drills, predictive combat math. All smuggled into her education beneath the noses of alien officials who assumed humans could only scream and beg. When she opened her eyes again, she was calm. They had sold her like cattle. They would watch her fight like a beast. But soon, very soon, they'd realize the real mistake. They had let her into the arena. And Ellie never fought fair. The combat arena on Yantros Zeta wasn't built, it was grown. It sprawled across the surface of a domesticated asteroid like a wound made of chrome and coral, its exterior pulsing faintly with heartbeat lighting. Inside, gravity shifted every 3 minutes in accordance with competitive fairness standards, which mostly served to make non-tentacled competitors vomit. The walls were embedded with thousands of translucent panels, through which one could see the whirring forms of betting drones and syndicate auditors. Somewhere deep within the structure, a chorus of cloned monks chanted the names of past champions in a monotone trill designed to instill either reverence or existential despair, depending on the listener's species. Ellie sat still in the preparation chamber, staring at the ceremonial war paint offered to her on a floating tray. The assistant assigned to her, a polite but mildly panicked amphibioid with 6 blinking eye stalks, gestured to the colored pigments. For psychological advantage, it croaked. Tradition. You must mark your intent. Ellie raised an eyebrow. And if I don't have any? The eye stalks all blinked simultaneously, a blink pattern she was fairly sure translated to mild dismay and dread. She picked up the red pigment and drew a small smiley face on her palm. There. Intent. The assistant said nothing. It made a note on a datapad, perhaps updating her classification from uncooperative to terrifyingly flippant. Across the asteroid, the crowd had begun to gather. The stands filled with thousands of beings, many of whom had bet entire moons on today's outcome. A few were already drunk on victory elixirs. sipping from floating chalices and spraying fine mists of celebration across neighboring patrons. Others sat grimly, wearing their house colors, whispering prayers to gods with too many vowels. Giant holographic banners projected the odds, 873 to 1 against the human girl. A trio of insectoid nobles passed around a betting tablet, chittering with anticipation. She dies in the first minute, one said. I give her 40 seconds. She's not even augmented. No tail, no auxiliary limbs, no combat bloomers. This is theater. From above, the screens shifted. The arena's announcers came online, two creatures in overlapping translation spheres, voices echoing through a dozen frequency bands. Good cycle, blood fans. Welcome to the Sargalax throne bout, where all screams are sacred and no refunds are guaranteed. A roar, fireworks, real ones, exploded across the ceiling. An alien behind the front row caught a flaming shard in its third lung and applauded through the injury. Today's challenger, if one may call her that, is a human. Species designation, Terran. She is 5.6 units of local vertical, weighs nearly nothing, and possesses no verified offensive appendages. Another voice chimed in. She is also apparently deeply sarcastic. Indeed, she drew a smiling face on her hand. The crowd howled with amusement. A Sargalax merchant passed out novelty items shaped like Ellie's expressionless face. In the preparation chamber, Ellie took a sip of thick, bitter nutrient paste. It tasted like burnt plastic and contempt. She was calm, not because she had confidence, though she did, but because fear required imagination, and hers was too busy calculating. The graph cycle was random, but patterns emerged every 300-second interval. The arena floor shifted on a predictable axis, and certain panels hummed a fraction louder. Energy conduits, possibly dangerous, possibly useful. She cataloged 12 such nodes. Then the door opened. The assistant gave a nervous little bow and gestured for her to follow. The hallway beyond was lined with light pulses that guided her to the entrance platform. A force field separated her from the arena itself. The field shimmered faintly, like a dream half forgotten or a memory of drowning. Across the field, a second platform rose. The champion had arrived. Het Loro of Sargalax, defender of 9 systems, bearer of the triple maw, lord of the 8th fold. He was majestic, in the way a landslide is majestic, 12 feet tall when coiled, with 6 arms folded across his armored chest, mandibles etched in ceremonial grooves, and a hide that shimmered with battle polish oil. His weapon, a vibrating halberd tipped with fossilized screams, was held with casual ease in 2 of his limbs. The other 4 hung at rest, twitching with anticipation. He bowed to the crowd. 100,000 throats cried his name in return. Ellie stepped forward onto the platform. Boos followed her like a low tide. A few humans in the audience, likely expats or ideological tourists, clapped in lonely defiance. She ignored them all. A voice echoed, "Fighters, present yourselves." Het Loro raised 2 fists and bellowed a sound that cracked several audio sensors. Ellie raised 1 eyebrow and scratched her ear. "Fighters, state your intent." Het Loro pounded his chest and emitted a pheromone cloud that made 3 nearby viewers faint in euphoria. Ellie tilted her head toward the announcer's box. "My intent is to disappoint everyone here." There was a stunned pause. Then the announcers cackled. A bold psychological tactic from the human. The countdown began. Ellie rolled her shoulders, loosening her spine. Gravity was still Earth standard. She had about 30 seconds before it shifted. Het Loro crouched low, vibrating with bloodlust. She checked his stance. Weight too far forward. Confidence would be his first weapon and his last mistake. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The field dropped. Het Loro surged forward with the fury of 1,000 years of gladiatorial tradition behind him, howling a name that translated loosely as all must break. Ellie stepped to the side. Not ran, not ducked, just a single step, timed perfectly as the floor shuddered and shifted to low grav. Het Loro missed by inches. He hit the wall with enough force to crack the panel. The crowd gasped. A few stared confused as Ellie crouched in silence. She didn't attack. She watched. Let the champion reposition. Let him feel the heat rise in his throat. Let him realize slowly, achingly, that she was not here to flail and die. He turned with a roar, spinning his halberd in a blur. She dropped flat, sliding beneath the blade as the gravity tilted again, upward this time. She grabbed a handhold on the floor with her left hand, anchoring herself, using the inertia to swing her legs around in an arc that brought her foot to the back of his knee joint. It wasn't a strong strike, but it was surgical. Het Loro stumbled. The audience fell into a peculiar silence, something between confusion and interest. The kind of quiet that fills a room when a magician's trick goes wrong, but somehow becomes more fascinating. Het Loro attacked again, this time smarter. He faked high, swept low. Ellie dropped into a shoulder roll, used the floor's curved incline to gain speed, and launched herself onto his back. He twisted, impressive speed for his mass, but she was already off, rebounding from a wall and landing behind him. She tapped the back of his armor. Once. Just enough to say, "I could have." The crowd began to murmur. The announcers sounded nervous. Het Loro is recalibrating. Indeed, the human appears to be operating on a different. Oh my, she's adjusting to the graph cycle mid-motion. Is that legal? Het Loro roared and activated his secondary limbs. All six now engaged. The halberd swung. Ellie ducked, but not low enough. The blade grazed her shoulder, just enough to bite. Blood spilled in a graceful arc, sparkling in the shifting light. The scent hit the front rows. The crowd screamed in ecstasy. Ellie grimaced, not from pain, but from the distraction. Blood would blur her focus. She needed a finish. Now. She scanned the arena. Node 9 was close. One of the energy conduits. She led him toward it. Het Loro followed, bellowing triumph. He believed she was retreating. She wasn't. She hit the node at full speed, leaped, and twisted in midair as the gravity flipped sideways again. Her hand found the upper bracket, just as it discharged. For an instant, the world became slow. Electricity arced. Her vision shrank to a pinpoint. Her body moved without thought. She dropped, landed behind Het Loro as he passed beneath her arc, and struck. One perfect blow. Not brute force, she lacked the mass, but precision. Right between the armor plates at the base of his skull, where his secondary brain was exposed during blood-cooling cycles. A weak point known only to those who studied Sargalac's anatomy in stolen lab files. His body went rigid. He collapsed. The arena held its breath. Then erupted. Not applause. Silence. Not shock. Awe. One announcer whispered. She blinked. And he died. Ellie stood alone in the center of the ring, breathing slow, blood running down her arm. Somewhere a senator fainted. Somewhere else, a billion credits changed hands. And somewhere in the galaxy, someone very important just whispered, "What the hell are humans?" Het Loro's body had barely cooled when the aftershocks began. Not literal ones, though the seismic tremors from his fall did register briefly on the station's lower decks, but political, institutional, existential. The kind of tremors that make entire species recheck their evolutionary charts and start revising the chapters titled Invincibility. Ellie sat in the post-combat debriefing chamber, a sterile cube filled with faint blue light and the faint hum of passive scanning equipment. A medical bot hovered nearby, politely insisting she remove her shirt for treatment. She ignored it. Her shoulder ached like hell. She liked the ache. It was proof, not just that she had survived, but that she'd done it without anyone's help, without a team, without augments. Just bone, blood, and a dozen years of unspoken numbers. A projection flickered to life. 3 alien officials blinked into view on the far wall, all embedded in shimmering hollow panels. One resembled a slug wearing ceremonial medals. Another was a crystalline lattice, with a voice like wind chimes in distress. And the last looked distressingly like an undercooked pie wearing glasses. "Human," said the crystal, its voice polite but strained. "Congratulations on your surprising result." Ellie said nothing. The pie thing cleared its throat. We are, initiating an inquiry into the combat protocols. There are murmurs, conspiracies. You understand. There are accusations of tampering. Ellie blinked slowly. Are you accusing me of cheating? Not directly, said the slug. But we must ensure the integrity of the arena, especially now that a galactic champion has been defeated by a girl with a math hobby. Ellie finished. They didn't laugh. Not even the pie. The crystal tried again. Statistical models gave you a 0.12% chance of victory. Our analysts are struggling. Ellie leaned forward. Probability isn't prophecy. It's just poorly disguised arrogance. Het Loro assumed mass equals dominance. The rest of you agreed. That's not math. That's narrative bias. The room fell silent. She stood, shoulder bleeding anew, and walked to the edge of the room. The door opened for her before she even raised a hand. Out in the corridor, the mood was different. Technicians flinched when she passed. Guards watched her too carefully. One alien child, blue-skinned, tusked, clutching a floating snack pod, stared in open awe. Somewhere in the walls, the arena's internal gossip channels buzzed with speculation. The humans were rising, they said. Or maybe she was an anomaly, a freak, a warning. She moved silently toward her temporary quarters. Every step calculated. Because here was the truth. Her win had broken something. It wasn't the champion. It wasn't the odds. It was the story. The Galactic Combat League thrived on story, on myth, on spectacle. Every champion, every challenger, every bout, crafted and sold like ancient epics. But Elliot stepped in without backstory, without flash, without lineage or augmentation or noble tragedy. Just a young woman who'd been auctioned off like a pet, and who'd dismantled a legend with 3 variables and 1 broken rule. And that the galaxy couldn't process. In her quarters, the wall screens blared new headlines. Human girl cracks Het Loro. Is at the end of arena order. Unmodified. Underdog. Unstoppable. Biological anomaly or hidden weapon? She watched for a moment, then powered the screens down. Instead, she pulled a data slate from the hidden lining of her issued uniform. Not hers, technically. Smuggled in. It connected to nothing, couldn't transmit, couldn't receive. But it held blueprints, maps, memories. She opened a file labeled Sargalac's nervous systems, weak points, regrowth limits, fluid pressure variances. Cross-referenced against her own annotations. The strike she'd used had been one of 12 options. The others had less favorable outcomes. 1 would have left her paralyzed. 2 were fatal only to hybrids. She highlighted the one she'd chosen. Margin for error, 3.4%. Small comfort. She pulled up the next opponent's file. The schedule hadn't been formally announced, but she already knew how the league worked. She wasn't going to get a break. The next match would be a test. They'd try to reassert control, rebalance the scales. They couldn't afford for her to win again, not because they hated her, but because she didn't fit. The arena wasn't built for outliers. So they'd throw someone impossible at her. And that made it fair again. She smiled faintly and began her analysis. Her training hadn't come from Earth. Not officially. Earth didn't have a combat league. Earth didn't send fighters to die for entertainment. But Earth did have memories. Old programs. Secret treaties. Ghost academies from the war that wasn't, a Cold War between the stars that never made the history books because the stars didn't want it remembered. Ellie was a product of that quiet war. Not bred, not augmented, taught. Taught to think in ways that couldn't be regulated. Probability was only half her advantage. The rest was expectation management. Opponents didn't lose because she outpowered them. They lost because they didn't see her coming. She would keep it that way. The next fight was in 48 hours. The arena released a teaser. Her opponent was a multi-phased silicoid entity from the twin moons of Rax. Codename Syndril. A being with no fixed form, known for turning previous challengers into particulate anecdotes. The odds, 1/102 to 1. She exhaled. In the morning, she would walk the arena floor again, study the terrain, the grav cycles, the resonant frequencies of each weapon cache built into the walls. Tonight, she ran simulations, each scenario detailed down to micro-movements. She sketched Cinderell's previous fights frame by frame, analyzing shape-shift timings, signal flares, phase lag transitions. Every opponent it had faced relied on raw impact. Even the fast ones died because they tried to outrun a system that rewrote itself mid-fight. But none of them had tested signal disruption at specific node frequencies. None had used their own blood as a thermal decoy. None had considered that a silicoid might be vulnerable to information overload. She designed a move based on feedback loops. Dangerous, sloppy, depended on millisecond execution and localized energy spikes. Success rate, 16.7%. Survival rate, 48%. She marked it in red. Viable if cornered. Sleep was a formality. She rested 1 hour, just enough for her body to flush the worst of the fatigue poisons. Her dreams were silent, just numbers, drifting. Morning arrived with a knock. 2 guards, nervous. One holding a clipboard that glowed when it trembled. "You're requested on the Hall of Champions walkway," the taller one said. "Ceremonial display before match 2. Ellie shrugged on her tunic. "Is this before or after the arena resets its bias parameters?" The guard blinked. "I don't know what that means." She followed them in silence. The walkway was suspended in vacuum-sealed transparent steel, arcing over the arena. The crowd below couldn't hear her, but they saw everything. Her figure, her walk, her refusal to wear the ceremonial sash that all other fighters had donned. Cinderella was already displayed on the opposite end. It shimmered like melted glass, drifting in lazy motion, reflecting 37 colors and none of them warm. The announcers narrated the spectacle with increasing unease. "This is a reminder that all fighters enter by choice, legally speaking, and represent the pride of their people." "She has no people," said the other. "She was a slave, an auction lot. Now she's a wild card. Now she's a threat." Ellie reached the edge of the walkway. She looked down at the arena. A glimmer of light traced the floor, probably an accidental reflection. She noted its angle. The sun had shifted just enough to change shadow alignments. That gave her a better timeline on heat cycles. The league was trying to stack the deck again. That was fine. She didn't need a fair fight, just a clear target. As she turned to leave, a small voice echoed from behind. Not a voice she recognized. Not a language she spoke. But she understood it all the same. It came from a child pressed against the wall, held up by their parent. Their skin a shade of violet. Eyes wide. One hand pressed over the heart. Ellie returned the gesture, then walked back into the shadows, where champions were made not by myth, but by choice. And probability, calculated to the decimal. It took Cinderella exactly 19 seconds to realize it was going to die. In fairness, that was longer than most opponents managed. The silicoid entity, phase-shifting and semi-sentient, had survived a dozen combat arenas across 3 solar systems. It had outlasted mercenaries, machine titans, genetically tailored apex predators, and once, an entire moon-based gladiator cult. It had never faced someone who treated it like a spreadsheet. Ellie didn't move much in the opening seconds of the fight. She was still, waiting, posture relaxed, hands half lowered as though she'd wandered into the wrong room. Her hair was slicked back from the prep fluids, a fresh cut high on her cheek from last night's sabotage attempt by a nervous league official, still bleeding slightly. It didn't matter. Her blood had purpose now. Cinderella extended one limb, no, 7, in an arcane helix of razor light and shifting mass. The announcers launched into a dramatic countdown, voices thick with anticipation and thinly veiled fear. One of them had placed a side bet against the house. Another was broadcasting in real time to 1 million viewers who demanded spectacle. There was the scent of cooked copper and adrenal pheromones in the air. Then movement. Ellie sidestepped the first attack before it was fully committed. Not dodging, preempting. Like she'd read the code of its thoughts. She let her heel strike the arena floor just as the grav cycles reversed. She skated on inertia, crossed 2 meters in under a second, twisted her shoulder to let one bladed appendage glance off her tunic, then jammed a thin rod into the floor. It wasn't a weapon. It was a tuning fork. Syndro paused. Its neural phase field flickered. Ellie struck the rod once, gently. The note resonated, one precise frequency, subtle, but destabilizing. Not enough to wound, just enough to distract. Then she moved. She used the hesitation to vault up a curved section of the arena's inner wall, flipped sideways in midair. She was always fighting gravity, fighting rhythm, and landed just behind the silicoid's central mass node. She whispered, not loudly, but loud enough. Checkmate. The blast pulse that followed wasn't an explosion in the traditional sense. It was a correction, a triggered harmonic distortion from the arena's own environmental grid, carefully synchronized with Syndro's primary conductive resonance. It disrupted every nerve pathway it had. Not enough to kill, but enough to stop every thought at once. The silicoid entity crumpled into a geometric puddle. Dead silent. The crowd didn't roar. They stared. No one clapped. Even the announcers fell quiet. Ellie stood in the ring, winded, bleeding more now, but upright. And something shifted, far larger than the crowd, the arena, or the odds. In the private diplomatic wing of the League Tower, emergency treaties were being revised mid-sentence. In the Senate of 9 Moons, the oldest beings in the galaxy blinked their vertical eyes and muttered a phrase that hadn't been used in 2,000 years. We underestimated them. And at a dusty console in an Earth relay outpost, long since mothballed and labeled inactive, an alert pinged. The Earth Defense Council received the message. Ellie Cade alive. Arena victory count. 2 status, active threat. Her name hadn't crossed their channels in 5 years. Now it echoed. By the time Ellie reached the staging corridor, 3 combat marshals were waiting. They didn't speak. She didn't need them to. One handed her a towel. One scanned her vitals. The third just stared like she might detonate. No one mentioned what everyone knew. 2 wins in a row. 2 impossible wins. The League had a serious problem. And Ellie was smiling now. Barely, but it was there. The smile of someone who had waited their entire life to be underestimated, to be ignored, to be boxed up and auctioned and laughed at. Because it made what came next so much more satisfying. She was escorted to the briefing chamber. But they didn't lock the door this time. Smart. They had reviewed the security logs. No point locking a cage that holds a ghost. A senator was already waiting for her, wrapped in 3 layers of ceremonial fabric and glistening with sweat. His species, a moss-like biped, had never spoken to a human directly. Now he held out his fronds, trembling. "You can't win again," he said. "Not a third time. It would destabilize the entire interspecies balance." Ellie nodded thoughtfully. "Yes. I mean, don't misunderstand. You've proven something. Bravery. Ingenuity. We're impressed. Deeply. But the League was built on tradition. Combat. Glory. Your calculations, they're violating the spirit of." She held up a hand. "You auctioned me like livestock," she said, voice low. "You made me a product. You broadcast me bleeding for amusement. And now that I've turned your game against you, you want to talk spirit." The senator wilted slightly. "I don't want apologies," Ellie continued. "I want terms." The air grew colder. Or maybe that was just the room adjusting to her tone. "I walk free," she said. "My file is expunged. Earth's exile status is revoked." "That's not something the League." "It is now," she said. "Because I have momentum. And momentum terrifies you." A long silence. Then a nod. A trembling, reluctant nod. "Done." Ellie stood. She didn't shake his hand. She walked out of the chamber, past the guards who now saluted her, without quite knowing why, past the technicians who watched her like one watches a predator in a glass box that might, at any moment, turn out to be stronger than the glass. She walked to the docking ring. A transport waited, unmarked. Small. Fast. No honor guards. Just the quiet hiss of engines preparing to leave orbit. No crowd saw her off. No camera followed her. But the whisper moved faster than light. She walked away. The girl they auctioned for laughs. The girl who killed a champion with a smiley face on her palm. The girl who beat a god of shifting crystal and treated it like a stubborn equation. They said she never looked back. Not at the arena. Not at the stars. Not at the species who had bought her, laughed at her, bet against her. She walked with the silence of inevitability. And just before the transport doors closed, someone shouted her name. It was a child's voice again. Couldn't have been more than 6 standard years. Ellie, what happens now? She turned just slightly. Now, she said. Now you stop watching us fight. And you start wondering what we're fighting for. Then the doors sealed. The transport launched. Quietly, unceremoniously. 100 systems held their breath. And Earth began preparing for what came next.